This is Akashvani. In the program Spotlight, now we bring you a discussion on India's G20 presidency, the voice of Global South. The participants are former Ambassador Veena Sikri and Lalima Aneja Dang, anchor.
Well, India has a great fortune of holding the presidency of G20 this year. About 200 meetings have been planned all through the year in various parts of the country. And the theme is One Family, One Earth, One Future, much in tune with our Indian philosophy of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Well, we have with us Ambassador Ms. Veena Sikri to talk more on this. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Ambassador Sikri, this group of G20 or G20 as we call it in short, represents world's major economies to address global economic issues, affordable healthcare and sustainable development. And surely this encourages dialogue and cooperation at the global level. Let's have an overview first. What has been the contribution of G20, which was started way back in 1999, and where does India go from here?
You know, the G20 is indeed a very important mechanism which was really given a boost by the financial economic crisis of 2008, and which has the capacity, because it brings together the economically developed countries, it has the capacity to have a global impact, because in terms of percentages of world GDP, percentages of world population, it has a tremendously strong impact. And also I think it is a great reflection on the inadequacy of other mechanisms like the UN, like the UN Security Council, like institutions like Bretton Woods institutions, financial institutions, IMF, World Bank are doing. So there is a great deal of dissatisfaction at this point, and this has been considerably worsened by the COVID pandemic, where people are feeling extremely frustrated that even whatever little development work was happening earlier has been left behind, has further been held up, has further broken apart, as it were. So I think India's presidency of the G20, taking it up at this important moment, India took a very bold and correct decision to take the G20 meetings very seriously and take the problem, catch the problem by its horns, as it were, and present solutions which the world hopefully can accept and which will genuinely contribute to acceleration of world prosperity and taking it forward on that account. And I think in this context, the development ministers meeting that is currently taking place in Varanasi is perhaps the most important of all the others, because it brings together the results of all the others, you know, whether it is the tourism or the women's meeting or the Think 20, it brings together all of those outcomes, all of those ideas into a collective whole. And I think the impact of this meeting's outcome on the G20 summit in New Delhi in September, that will indeed be very strong and positive. So I think the tone has been set this morning by the video message which our Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi ji gave at the G20 Development Ministers meeting, and also the specific plans of action set forward in the keynote address and message by our External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar. And you know, our Prime Minister gave the very, very special focus. He spoke about Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, as you've said. It's a very important aspect because we take that very seriously. The world is one, and if you try to have divided progress, the world will, nobody can achieve that progress because it will fall apart. Today it's an integrated whole, and leaving people behind is just not a possibility if you want to move ahead for yourself and for the world as a whole. So the question is, how do we move forward in the world as a whole? For that, India has taken the Sustainable Development Goals, which were adopted in 2015 by the UN, as a benchmark, because these Sustainable Development Goals were actually a very good set of objectives which were adopted in 2015 with the target of implementation by 2030. They were very comprehensive, they covered all aspects of development, and they were integrated. Like, you know, for example, gender issues appear not only in the SDG 5, which is for gender, but also in many other SDGs, in the SDG of education, in the SDG of poverty alleviation, in the SDG of health and nutrition. So the integrated aspect was a very important one, and that is why I am particularly happy that this achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals in the next 7 years has been chosen for special focus. And India has presented a very ambitious, a very well-created, well-crafted action plan for achieving these Sustainable Development Goals in the next 7 years so that we keep up the target of 2030. The most important part in the presentation being made is there must be comprehensive and inclusive and universal, and nobody must be left out. Now, this is very important, and this shows India's leadership of the Global South, that we realize that it is developing countries who are being left out. They have been left behind, and they are suffering greatly, not only by lack of development, but compounded by the pandemic, breaking of the supply chain, disruption of supply chains, and making it very difficult for individual countries even to meet their basic needs. And so we have to have a comprehensive plan, whether it is food security, energy security, the health for all these have to be integrated into one plan. And some of the aspects that have been chosen by our Prime Minister in his message, one is to overcome the data divide. That there is this huge data divide. There's data illiteracy, a digital illiteracy on the one hand, and data inaccessibility at the same time. If you're digitally illiterate, then you cannot access any of the data. The data becomes inaccessible to you, and you are left behind. Internet accessibility, smartphones, computers, all these things have to be equally available to all so that the data divide is overcome and people are not left out because of the data divide. And certainly, India's own tremendous achievements in aspects like digital payments, and where we are today the world leaders by far, we are way ahead of the rest of the world. And we are willing to share this with other developing countries. We're willing to bring them also on par in terms of data literacy, digital literacy, in terms of digital payment, in terms of assuring that the youngsters get computer education and so on. So this is a very important aspect that our Prime Minister mentioned. The second aspect was on women-led development. I think this is a very valuable recognition that our Prime Minister has given. It has been one of the big focus areas of the G20, and I really appreciate it because since 2009, my own group, South Asia Women's Network, we've been fighting for this, calling it women-led development, giving women the leadership, the agency, making them key stakeholders. And this is what is being recognized in today's meeting, that gender equality and women's empowerment are crucial to achieve the SDGs. And unless we have women-led development, we will not be able to achieve the SDGs by 2030. So this is very important. And the third aspect, which was there also there in the afternoon session today, on which our External Affairs Minister also spoke, is green development, life approach, LIFE, lifestyle for environment, which again is an Indian concept, which is put forward by our Prime Minister a short while ago. And I think this is very valuable because we recognize that, you can make all these rules and regulations and climate change goals and even climate finance and so on. But unless you change your lifestyle, unless you're prepared to make those basic changes in your lifestyle, all the rules and regulations mean nothing. You will never achieve it. Let's take the use of plastics, for example. Unless you recognize what you have to do with that, the oceans of the world are being flooded with millions of tons of plastic.
Absolutely.
And the fish life, the aquatic life is really hampered. They are dying. They're coming, they're being found dead on the shores in many countries. Even today there was an announcement about a lot of fish lying dead on the shores of one of the states in America. So, this whole business of lifestyle change has to be universally recognized and universally accepted. So I think this focus also is very important and valuable, and also another issue on which India's leadership of the Global South is shining through loud and clear. So I think these areas have been very well highlighted through this meeting, and we are looking forward to tomorrow, where we'll have the final outcome document of the development ministers meeting, and I'm sure it will be a very important and comprehensive and universal document.
Right, ma'am. Let me also talk about the fact that post-COVID and the Ukraine-Russia war, these two incidents, ma'am, they have brought philosophy to the world, and that is that we all live in a symbiotic relationship, all countries. None can exist without the other. In that context, the Honorable Prime Minister has talked about development being a core issue for the Global South. Do you see that happening? Because for a long time, Global South was neglected. Now, our Prime Minister is becoming the voice of the Global South, and whether it is environment or tourism, we are now showcasing ourselves, marketing ourselves well.
Yes, certainly. I think that was a very beginning point of our Prime Minister's video message this morning, and where he said that development is a core issue for the Global South. And we are the countries who have been impacted by these two issues, which were very, very disastrous issues, the pandemic and the Ukraine-Russia crisis. And these have led to the food crisis, they led to a fuel crisis, and has led to a fertilizer crisis. And so now these crises themselves are leading to instabilities and geopolitical tensions, because we know that food security affects every country country in the world, and because of the supplies coming from Ukraine and Russia being disrupted, it has made such a great crisis that India has stepped forward, and from our own reserves of wheat and rice, we have sent grain supplies to any of our fellow developing countries who needed them, and they have appreciated them most valuably. So I think the harmonized, symbiotic, integrated nature of world development is becoming evident more and more, and for this you need leadership to highlight this message and get the developed countries of the world to accept it. And this is the leadership that India is so valuably providing during the G20, because it has not only arranged these large number of meetings on different issues, but it is walking the talk by putting forward very specific programs. It is not just having meetings for discussion and then people go away and forget about it, but each meeting, and this particular meeting, Development Ministers meeting, is particularly significant because it has brought together so many of the other discussions, and it has brought it together in the context of the importance of development and in the context of the importance of achieving the SDGs by 2030, and in the context of the need for the green development through the changing of lifestyle approach. And I think that all the feedback that we have is that the developing countries really value this leadership. Now the question comes that the work will continue till the G20 summit and afterwards also, but the G20 summit in September is very important. So we can get these ideas through. I'm sure that we reflected in the final documents, and this will give India the leadership role in the post-G20 on implementation. So we have to choose after that about the implementation, but right now the ideas are so clearly and so specifically mentioned that leadership is becoming stronger and stronger and more self-evident by the day.
And ma'am, like under the aegis of the Prime Minister, we helped other countries and gave them vaccines. As you said, we helped them with wheat and rice during the crisis. We also brought safe not just our own students, our own people out from other countries during the times of war. We helped people from other nations as well. So we have actually proven that India is action-oriented and it takes care. It is capable of not just looking after her own self, but the entire world. In that context, ma'am, the fact that G20 represents 85% of the global GDP and over 75% of the global trade and about 2/3 of the world population, is it India's time? Are we ready to be heard and be the voice of the global south?
Yes, I think we are ready. We have been providing the leadership, but through the G20 we have brought the leadership issues very clearly. We have crystallized the issues into several action plans, into several specific points that we want implemented, and now we hope to carry forward this leadership on different issues. I mean, also during COVID pandemic, you saw how, despite the fact that India has such a huge population and we needed to get everybody vaccinated, but we were still willing and able, and we did send vaccines to other countries in need. And they really recognized it. Even till today, there are many countries in Africa, Latin America, and other parts of Asia where they value what happened during the pandemic, because this is leadership in action.
Yes.
So I think that just as leadership in action during COVID pandemic, leadership in action during the food crisis and the fertilizer crisis caused by the Ukraine-Russia conflict, now we have leadership being illustrated by the various specific plans being put forward by India during the meetings of the G20. And in every case, we have seen that they're being welcomed and accepted. So I'm sure we'll see that tomorrow as well. And then we have to go ahead with the implementation of these so that we are in fact able to carry forward our leadership of the Global South through actual implementation in UN bodies, in individual conferences, in our bilateral relations, in our regional groupings, which we are members of so many regional groupings. All of that will see the impact of the strong and positive decisions that are now being taken in the G20.
Right. As we hold meetings all over the country, from Udaipur to Rann of Kutch to Jammu Kashmir to Sikkim to Delhi, we earnestly hope that the voice of the Global South is heard. Not just that, we also hope that the developed nations, which have always been very good marketers, India is now poised to become hot tourist spot, seeing the diversity that we can offer to the world. That is another beautiful byproduct of the G20 meetings. Thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on India's G20 presidency, the voice of Global South. The participants were former Ambassador Veena Sikri and Lalima Aneja Dang, anchor. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of Akashvani. You can listen to it on our mobile app, News on AIR. This program is also available on our YouTube channel, News on AIR Official. You may share your feedback about this program through email at airnsdtalks 928-909-4044 or WhatsApp on 928-909-4044.